Give me just a moment here. And boom. Yeah. This is not normally what you see, is it? Indeed, tonight is a painting night. To be exact, we're painting the Otyugh. All warty and slimy and nasty. Now, I'm going to turn the camera up just a little bit. Yes, it's a little singy you see up here. Getting her snuffles in now. And let me go ahead and make it clear in some areas that I am live now. And there we go, that should do it. Now, as you see, I'm going to be painting this big, ugly, nasty thing. And part of painting this big, ugly, nasty thing is going to be, I'm going to be experimenting. I'm going to be using a technique I have not tried before. It's called the loaded brush technique. So what we're going to do, besides me picking up a can in October, we're going to start with this shade. It's a weird greenish brown by Vallejo in their Panzer Aces line. It's called French Tank Crew. But what we're going to do is we're going to darken it first. Move some of these paints out of the way. Darken it, we're going to add in a bit of oak brown from Army Painter, which will actually make it less green. But then we're going to bring some of that green back and maybe a little bit lighter with the Army green. So, we're going to start off, have a fresh, clean palette. I'm going to remember how many of each of these I put into the divot, because I'm going to need to recreate the same mix in just a few minutes for the special technique I'm learning. Alright, so that's going to be I'm using a lot more paint than usual because this is a large critter. Now, we're going to darken it. Let's see, that was, let's say 5 parts of the greenish brown. I'm going to put in three parts of the dark oak brown. And oh yeah, that's right. I've never actually used this particular paint, so I need to go ahead and got a sharp point here, and it's been sitting so long it's built up a little bit of amount in the nozzle. So I pull that out, and then one. Okay, so that's 5 parts gray-green, 3 parts of the brown, and 2 parts of the green. I'm going to go ahead and just mix it up and make sure it got dark enough. We might end up having to add a little bit of black to it. Because this is actually going to be a darker shade than our actual eventual mid-tone. Okay, I'm thinking we need to add some black to it. Just a little bit to darken it. So I take my black. Let's say 1 part black. Okay. Now, we are going to use my wash medium. This is a mix of golden matte medium, distilled water, and flow aid. It's 12 parts water to 7 parts medium and 1 part flow aid. We're going to add in six parts of that. We may end up adding more. This is to thin it down, because you always want your base coat to be thinned down for everything you do, because it does matter. Okay, and as we mix, it gets nice and dark, and it still keeps that greenish, brownish, grayish color that we wanted. Okay, perfect. Now, oh, come on, stupid camera. There we go. We're just going to go ahead and paint over the entirety of the figure. We're going to go from the back to the front. We are not painting the base with this, because the base we're going to be painting totally separately. But it doesn't matter what part of the figure it is, we're just going to give it this coat. It's to the point where if I actually had a primer this color, it would be what I would have primed it with. Okay. Now, the reason why we thinned it down is because we want this to not leave any brush strokes behind. We wanted to make sure that it gets into all of the nooks and crannies while still sticking to the top of the peaks. And this is actually going to be one night that I'm not going to get a Carlton interruption, because he's rather upset that he can't get to me. Now, the technique I'm going to be using to highlight this after I get done with this is one that I've seen a few videos about. I've read some about it, and I actually have never tried it before. No, fuzzbutt, no. So, y'all will be watching me try it for the first time. Okay. One thing I wonder while I do this: do any miniature sculptors, or game designers for that matter, ever consult with fashion designers for the looks of the characters for their world? And one thing you'll notice is that this is an unusually opaque mixture for as thin as I've got it. It's covering almost completely. And I've actually got somebody watching now. Okay. No, but the technique I'm going to be using to highlight it is called the loaded brush technique. At its core, what you are doing is you are taking a thinned down version of your mid-tone or shadow into the belly of the brush, which is this part of the brush. And then on the very tip, you've got a bit of your highlight color. And by thin down, I mean we're talking like much thinner than what this is. We're almost not quite a wash level of thin. Uh, I hear the same phrases bandied about for how thin to make it as I do for how thin to make a wash, about this milky consistency. Now, I may have used too much paint into my palette. I am not a fan of using too much paint, but this is just so opaque, I may not need to do a second layer. As you can see, I'm trying to get this like nasty poop green color, because one of the features of the Otyugh, I use that word lightly, is that they live in dung heaps. Literally. They like any kind of organic material, but for some reason, organic material no one else uses is their favorite meal. I firmly believe that this creature was created just to explain why there were no piles of dragon poop lying around in the various realms. Oh yeah, it's eaten by Otyughs or Gulguthras. Yeah, see, a lot of times when a creature will have two names, like you'll have like the Illithid or Mind Flayer. You got a weird name, and you got a common name. With this critter, they've got a weird name, the Otyugh, and a weirder name, the Golguthra. I think they ended up splitting them up into two different critters later on. But yeah, the ecology of it is just that they are a trilaterally symmetrical beastie that feeds on poop. Well, anything organic, but usually poop. That's why we're making it the color of baby poop. Now, a lot of the underside will end up not being touched by the uh, technique we're doing, which is alright because it's in the shadows. What we'll end up doing with it is it'll end up being hit after I do this uh, loaded brush blending and it's all dry. We'll be adding on uh, a wash, mostly to show, to really catch some of the details in there and to really, really smooth out the blends, at least on the underside. We might have the no wash at all on the upper side if it comes out really well. You don't have to use every technique on every critter or every miniature. Okay. Makes you wonder how some of these critters keep their skin so nice in some of the drawings, because when you live in poop, your pores must get clogged. You know. Now, another fun fact about the Otyugh is back in the '80s, during the height of the both the height of the D&D Satanic Panic. Got a little bit of a cat hair on here. And during the height of the D&D cartoon, there was a series of bendy toys made. There was a dragon, there was a unicorn, and there was an Otyugh. Of all the critters to have a bendy toy made out of it, to represent the entire brand of D&D, the Otyugh, making sure we're getting every part of this underside. Yeah, so yeah, the Otyugh actually has a toy and numerous miniatures. And you want to know something? I've encountered them exactly twice in over 30 years of playing D&D as a player. Twice. Now, to give you an idea on the size of this, as I'm getting ready to start the center of the back and the tentacles, the back hoof is almost dry. So, we're not going to have too much of a problem with waiting on a layer to dry before we move on to the next technique. So we're going to go ahead and bring this up the tentacle. And then after we do this, we're going to take a pass and look around for any spots that we may have missed. You'll also notice I'm not using a very small brush. In fact, I'm using a rather large one, a number 5 round. And the reason for that is we want to cover ground as much as possible, not so much concerned with precision, especially since this is the first color. After we get the whole skin painted is when we'll go back in and we'll detail the spikes on these tentacles, the eyes over here, and the inner mouth, the hooves, and then we'll paint the base. I know some people say you should paint the base first, and I say that if you've got something like this, no, because you need to get your skin. The skin on this critter is more important than its base. So no, painting the base first is not a good idea for this figure. Never make decisions unilaterally about a figure or a technique. Like, let's say that a given character has really long flowy hair and a shaggy wolf pelt cloak. Well, you're going to use different techniques to paint the hair than you would painting the cloak. Well, unless you're speed painting. Speed painting's always just what works fastest and best. Now, after I get this skin painted, I am not going to be using this particular brush again tonight. So, okay, and then we're coming up behind it, dragging these down, and down the sides. I like how it's actually showing up as a nicely, a nice clear division between the gray base color and the greenish brown that we're painting on it. Sure that we're getting some of it out of there. That's another advantage to having this particularly thin, or having thinned down my paints. It doesn't settle as deeply into the cracks. Thus, it doesn't clog up the detail. Now, yeah, I'm hearing some of this. My mother is in the other room and she's watching uh, Project Runway or something, and they're talking about how their designs are video game characters. Or that's what they're supposed to design. And every single one of their characters that they're describing would fail utterly as a video game character because they don't seem to understand what video games are. You know? So, it's just sad. Alright, let's come on, let's get down in here. There we go. Okay, now bring up a little bit around the teeth, around the lips, because I missed that spot earlier. We're also going to go in towards the teeth and the gums, because we'll end up blending it in when we get to that, which I don't know if we'll get to it tonight. I think tonight we'll be almost entirely just painting this hide. I mean, I've been painting for 20 minutes now, and I'm just now getting done with a quick base coat. Okay, now let's see. Can I spot any areas that I missed with my brush? There. Right back here. And a little bit up here. Up here. Now, if there's an area on a miniature, like there's some spots right under the back of this leg that are extraordinarily hard to get to, but they're also extraordinarily hard to see. You don't have to pay as much attention to those areas. So, we have our base coat for our critter. And it still needs to dry a bit, so we're just gonna sit and talk for a minute, because apparently none of my usual audience is here. Now, further information, in 3rd edition, this critter was classified as an aberration. The best way to explain what an aberration is, it's something that is not only biologically improbable, it may or may not be based on physical laws native to the universe. A perfect example of this is the Beholder. The Beholder is not from any D&D universe natively. It's from outside the universe. And to be exact, it was created in the dreams of something. Some outer god or elder thing dreamed about a beholder. The first beholder. And so it developed just enough biology to actually survive, but with abilities that can't be explained by what they are. It gets so ridiculous that beholders reproduce by dreaming about another beholder, and that beholder escapes the first beholder's dream. Otyughs, on the other hand, these little guys here, which, yeah, the back hoof is nicely dry, but the rest of it is still kind of wet, so we need to kind of let it sit and settle. Otyughs, well, I've never really seen an article or anything explaining where Otyughs come from. So I guess you could say that. Oh, and by the way, yes, I 3D printed the little handle. He's got some blue tack sticking to it. You could make up whatever origins or biology you want for these things. It could be an actual alien from a different world. It could be something that dragged itself in here through the many angles of space, or through the outer darkness from another universe. A universe with different physical laws than ours. So, all I've done for the new watchers, all I've done so far is I've gotten a base coat on of a mix of French tank crew from the Viejo Panzer Aces line, a little bit of Army Painter Oak Brown, a little bit of Army Painter Army Green, and a little bit of black. To be exact, 5 parts of this, the tank crew, 3 parts brown, 2 parts green, and 1 part black. And that has created this wondrously disgusting baby puke green-brown shade. Okay. Looks like I need to go ahead and put a little dabble do ya, in the tip of this right nostril, because it didn't quite get. Yeah. When this base coat is done, I'll be using the loaded brush technique to give a basic highlight on on the larger surfaces and areas. The highlight color will be a kind of a pale mix of these: Viejo Model Color Orange Brown, Viejo Game Color Khaki, and Army Painter Skeleton Bone. But we'll be using loaded brush technique, which means I'll be taking the paint that I mixed up as the base color, which you can still see a little bit of it in there, moving it over to the center of the palette. Or better yet, just leaving it in its bucket, thinning it down even more than it is right now, because I did about a 2-to-1 paint to water just to give the base coat. I'm probably going to double up on that on the wash medium. Now the way it works, I'm going to use this rather large brush to point out how it works. You have a damp brush. You have a damp brush. You load the darker paint, the thinned darker paint, until it gets to about, decently into the belly of the brush. Then you dab it into the lighter color and just very carefully dab it onto like a paper towel, or in this case, the paper that I use for my underneath my painting. And then when you paint it on, it'll leave behind, if you paint it lightly, you'll leave behind just the lighter color. If you paint it heavily, if you push that brush in, it'll start mixing in with the darker color in here. So you'll end up with a nice blend between the highlight and the shadow and the base coat. Now, okay, yeah, it did. I do have a huge spot that I missed on the back of this tentacle here. I didn't so much miss as it didn't really take that well. It was really thin at the point where I had it on the brush that time, so it didn't really cover. But yeah, we need to wait until this completely cures. Okay. Now, do any of you have questions about painting or sculpting, or about Otyughs, or about outsiders or aberrations in D&D, and what the difference is between an aberration and an outsider, and any of that? Yeah, looking at it, it's still got a little ways to go before it's really dry. It also looks like it's going to be a little shiny, which doesn't matter because we are going to be giving it a patchy gloss and patchy uh, dull coat. Another thing we're going to be doing, probably not tonight, this Sterland Battlemire from Citadel is a texture paint that has kind of a grainy, grotty texture. Using something like this around the feet and kind of coming up towards the ankle area, and then dry brushing it with a rather dry shade will give it a look like it's been walking around in poop, which is coincidentally what we want. On the other hand, we're going to make the rock probably more of a sandstone color. We also am going to paint the inner mouth a very, very, very dark reddish black. Like, there is a wonderful example of that in the Viejo Model Colors Hull Red. It's much darker than this image appears. A little bit of that with a little bit of black, and it'd be a wonderful. And then we build outwards from the center of the mouth towards the edge of the lips, adding in a little bit more red, and then we kind of, since I painted this dark greenish brown so deep in, the outer edges we can just kind of feather off so that they fade into that green. Then we paint the teeth. I also paint the eyes on the upper eye stalk, and we paint the spikes on the other tentacles. The warts will probably go ahead and give a little bit of a red glaze around the warts and make them a little bit lighter than the rest of the skin. Like, these really nasty little bumps all over it. And the nails, well, before we put on that Sterland Battlemire, we're going to be painting them kind of a grayish stone-like color. Yes, I know, but it'll be mostly covered by that Battlemire anyway, so it may not even matter. There are holes in his hooves. I'm not bothering with them. Those are holes because this is a resin printed figure. I printed this on my Anycubic Photon. Where is that? There it is. When you've got 3 cats, you got to keep a sharp eye out for cat hairs. Now, the end result of what we did has kind of a satin texture when it's dry. So to really tell where it's dry and where it's still wet, you have to actually kind of tilt it slightly and keep an eye on what's called the specular highlight. Areas like right along inside here are still a lot shinier. It's a lot sharper highlight than areas further down. It's tricky to see on camera because the camera is exaggerating the differences. So I'm just keeping an eye out, and for the most part it's nearly done, but I don't want to take the risk. There's areas underneath that tentacle in front that are still quite wet. Area along that area. Areas in the base of this pseudopod. The inner shoulder. The back of this tentacle base are a little bit shinier. It's areas where it's still starting to dry. Unfortunately, we're only half an hour in, so it's going a lot faster than I expected. Now, I'm going to go ahead and let y'all know now that next Thursday, one of my best creations ever. Next Thursday, I will not have a show. One of the people in my Wednesday night gaming group is leaving town the end of next week. And so we're getting together and we're taking her out to a steakhouse and saying, we'll miss you, goodbye, we love you. Yes, this is probably the tightest gaming group I've been in a long time. I mean, like, it's the tightest group I've been in decades. Okay, taking another quick look. Yeah, it's still got a ways to go in some of these areas because some of them were still pretty wet. You can see some areas in the wrinkles right in front of here that are a little bit shinier. The back end is mostly good, but since this will involve, get some areas beside the back tendon on this left foot. Yeah, because this will involve a much thinned version of our initial base coat, I don't want to take the risk on accidentally erasing it when we go back over and just like washing it away. Now when it comes time for the eyes, I'm going to have to make a decision. Do I want them to look like unnatural? Do I want them to make it even creepier by making them look more human? And I just noticed I got paint on my... Yeah, it's dry already. Do I want them to make it look human and make it even creepier, or do I want it to be like just large irises, like a lot of real world animals? You want human eyeballs, huh, Mark? Yeah. I got the base coat down, like I said. So how much have you seen, Mark? And if you've seen more than just a few minutes, why haven't you spoken up? I'm trying to get conversation going while the paint's drying. So, talk about creepy critters or aberrations or the difference between aberrations and outsiders and things like that. By the way, you'll notice my finger is green. In the morning, my hands are clean, and this is actually just pale skin. Now, after a day of wearing my bronze ring, my finger's green, and so's the side of the fingers next to it. And I take it off while I'm painting just in case. Well, I went over the rough ecology of the Otyugh, or Gulguthra, and pointed out the reason why I painted it the color of baby poop as its base shade is that Otyughs eat poop. So I wanted a kind of an unhealthy brown. And I'm going to be building up to a more golden level. And I'm going to, when it's mostly done, I'm going to use the Sterland Battlemire texture paint, which is this grotty, grainy texture, to make it look like he's got poop caked on around his feet. The base itself is a stony base. I chose kind of a rocky base for him when I made the actual sculpt. That was actually deliberate. But I'm going to make the stone kind of like a sandstone color. Anyway, like I said, I'm looking around and looking for areas where it's still wet. These kind of small areas, like right in the crease. Let me get it a bit more towards the light. The crease right in here is still a little wet. And right about here. Beside the tendon is still wet. There's a couple small areas right here that are still wet. I'm not actually touching the figure with the brush. Inside the shoulder of the right foreleg. And other than that, it's definitely still considerable amount of wet in front of this tentacle. Now the problem is, I can't do it until this whole thing is dry. I can't continue on to the next part of the technique. And as I said, what I'm going to be doing is loaded brush technique. How are you at painting, Mark? What I'm probably going to do with this guy is, after he's done, I'm going to give him a gloss varnish and then zenithal down from the top a no, I'm going to give him a matte varnish and zenithal down from the top a gloss, so that it's got more of like a, dry underbelly but slimy back. Okay, while we're waiting, I'm going to go ahead and mix up. I've used probably about half the base coat that I had made, so I'm going to add in quite a bit more. 7, 8, 9, 10. A bit more wash. See how that's doing for consistency. Be pretty watery, and it's getting pretty good there. Not a wash so much as it's the paint that will be in the belly of the brush. Now, we are not going to thin the paint that's going in the next one. Well, my first recommendation, if you're experienced, you know what paints you prefer, and you can probably get your own. If you've only got a little bit of experience, oh, second, 1, 2, 4 parts of skeleton bone. If you're not that experienced, then I'd suggest the Army Painter Mega Set. Gives you everything you need. It's just Army Painter is a little bit harder to mix thoroughly than the others. 1, 2, 3 parts orange brown. I like the Viejo. When I get the funding back from the, one second, I screwed up the camera focus. When I get the funding in for the Green Tide, so I can continue doing this, I may try out the War Colors set. They come in you'll have red 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, where 1 is this really, really dark, opaque red, and 5 is this really pale red that may not be quite as opaque. So you've got this whole range, and you can and it's got the range, and then it's got the colors. So you could start with your darkest shade being the dark blue, build up through the greens, and then the highlight would be yellow to get this really orky yellow green look. Okay, let me go ahead and mix these two colors. Okay, it's a little bit too orangey. That orange is pretty strong. I wanted it healthier, not brightly colored. So that's good. We are more towards the khaki. You may or may not hear the agitator in there. Right, 1, 2, 3. And then a little bit more of the bone, just to lighten it even more. Thank you. I will admit the robed goblins are inspired by the night goblins from Games Workshop. They're a little bit less. They're a little bit creepier because they're sneaky, creepy, wearing the robes to keep hidden. Okay. There we go. Now, just to show you the difference in the shades. The base color, the highlight. Yeah, the mushrooms would make it too close. Okay, we still have a couple areas that are still wet. Not very many, and they're not very strong. And right now the biggest area is the area in front of this tentacle. So to keep them from drying out, since I did not have the forethought to break out my wet palette, I'm just taking one of the bottles and putting it over each of these little divots. And that kind of acts like a cap to keep them from drying out. Now, the reason why I decided to go for a healthier tone for the highlights is I like tonal variation. I don't like the cartoony style tonal variation that you'll see on some Game Workshop models. But I like there being the greenish brown fading to a pale, warm brown. It gives a nice contrast, and it gives interest to a figure that is mostly just bare skin, mostly just one color. Another thing I'm probably going to do after I finish the technique I'm doing is on the belly, give it a little bit of green ink wash, but only in the recesses, and give a little bit of flesh wash in the recesses on the upper part to give it more of that range of tone. And then that would still make the deep reds of the inner mouth, when I get it done, a nice eye-catching contrast. Now, almost everything that is currently gray in that inner mouth will probably end up almost black, and then rapidly fade through whole red, dragon red, true red, and then a pink before blending over the area where the stand up. There we go. Blending over the area where I've got the green overlapping into the lips. Okay. Alright, it's mostly dry there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start on the back foot. Okay, and the way this works, you need to have a brush that still has a decently sharp tip. I mean, that's enough. Okay, you get the brush damp. You just dab it in your water and you wipe it off on a paper towel or a piece of paper. Then you soak it into the wetter paint until it gets nicely into the belly of the brush. Dab it once or twice just to make sure, and then dip it briefly into the highlight. Now the lighter that you paint that highlight, like for example on the top of this, the purer the color becomes, and then the harder starts blending into the wash, the shadow color. And you kind of pull it up towards the highlight, because that'll give a nice blend towards that highlight. Now, you can't really see what it looks like now. And then I may have done it a little bit too strong on the highlight, so I'm just going to dab in here and the end result is technically you're mixing that highlight on the brush. We're going to soak in some more of this, make sure it's getting pretty good. And just a dab of the highlight paint. And just kind of mix it on the figure itself. And then areas that you want to make sure to shadow in, again, just redip into that original shadow color and bring it up. This way you also have control over how much highlight you have on something. Like for example, this back will have a lot more highlight on it. It's also literally the first time I've ever done this technique. And then we're just going to kind of now we're going to do the same thing. You want to try to be very careful with it, especially with the highlight color. We're going to come around on this little wrinkle and blend it in like that. Brush it towards the highlight, because that gives you your shade, because the highlight the pigment deposits at the end of the stroke. And the end result ends up being a lot nicer blend, especially if you use this as your base to work from, and then you put on your highlights and your shadows. Okay. Kind of okay. And you can see it's already got a nice it's got a bit of a texture to it, and part of that's because I'm not used to the technique. We're gonna go ahead and move. We're gonna go ahead and move to the back of the ankle. We're gonna put a little bit on here. And remember, the harder you press, the more of the darker shade comes out, and it starts mixing in with the lighter. Get a blending going. Okay. Now, are you looking forward to Endgame? Okay. Now we still have some more to do on the thigh here. Now, obviously, doing this all show would be a bit a bit of a slog. So here we go. Okay, let's bring this in. This is the thighs. I do intend on eventually hitting this with a light wash, just to help bring it out. All right. Okay, a little bit of the tip, just enough to give it a little bit more, very faint highlighting on this side, as we kind of missed some of it over here because we've been focusing on the side towards the camera. This could also be used as a variant of wet blending. That's where you have, normally it's done with two brushes instead of one, but yeah, we don't have the two brush wet blending technique ready to show. And I'm just gonna make sure to get this in between and blend out some of these shades. And there's a little bit more over here. Okay. Now, I'm going to rinse off my brush real quick because we don't want to build up too much paint on it. And looking at it, Got a nice bit of a shade on where I've been doing it. Oi. So yes, this is an experiment for me. It's not just a broadcast, it's an experiment. Now, again, we're gonna, it's already still damp, so we're just gonna build up paint in the belly. And then we're gonna dab it into this. And then we're gonna brush onto these wrinkles, the highlight. And then we're gonna kind of blend it down. A little bit more of that. A little bit more of the okay. A little bit more. Yeah, this is almost like an old technique. Uh, John Blanche was the miniature guru in the 80s. And one of his techniques was mixing the colors directly on the miniature. And that's effectively what we're doing here. We're mixing the color directly on the figure. This would later become what's known as wet blending. But at the time, it was unheard of. I mean, when you're creating an entirely new technique, originally the best way to call it is to describe exactly what you're doing, painting it, mixing on the miniature. Of course, John Blanche, originally at least, painted with oil paints. Okay. And now just to finish off the lower leg, I'm gonna load up the brush again, a little bit of that, and we're gonna brush on top of the toe seam there, and gonna start no fuzz butt. Nope, you can't jump up, fuzzball. Gonna mix it down. Okay. Welcome back. No, no. Phew. Okay. We're working on... No, because right now it would be very bad if Kitty jump up. Which is not to be confused with Johnny jump up. Which, by the way, was a type of cider. We're gonna come down this way. Come down to here, and come down here, and come down here. And then blend it in. A little bit more of the paint there to kind of mix it on the figure. And then we just blend it. Once again, we're kind of blending towards the lighter color. Hold on just a second. Okay, I'm gonna have to be right back. Okay, I'm back. Now, the next step is we're going to go ahead and move up to this leg. And just like before, we're loading up deep onto the brush, into the belly with this paint. And then we're just tapping it into the highlight paint. And then we're going to lightly go over where the highlights will be. And then down. I'm going to tap my hand just to get rid of some of that. And then we're going to start blending it in with the a little bit more wet on this. We're going to blend it in up here and across up here. Okay. And then kind of blend it in a little bit more dark of the dark paint on our brush. And okay, and then a little bit more. Like I said, this is almost turning into just straight up wet blending here. A little bit more of the dark around this one. Okay. By the way, I already have ideas for what to follow once the green tide is done. And it will be, among other things, my first full foray into terrain. Terrain for battle game and terrain for adventures. So that we could, for example, actually make a module based around uh make the terrain with an actual adventure module based around the terrain involved. Okay, let's bring that down. Okay. And then we kind of blend it just a little bit more. Now, the advantage of doing this and practicing on a 3D print is that if I had to print this for, something important and paint it, well, I could. If I screw it up, I can always just, print another copy. The advantage of doing it on this particular critter is because they're already supposed to be kind of nasty and dirty, and I can cover it up with fake dirt, etc. Okay, but it's not turning out too bad. I mean, the brushstrokes are pretty heavy. I probably needed to have the darker tone a bit more watery. But again, I'll be following this up with a wash, so go ahead and now move on. One thing that I would like to note about character design, and it's something that you kind of borrow from video games. If you're working on making your own miniature and you want to make this character that's really stands out, one thing to do is to make its silhouette. You know, if you're just seeing a shadowy figure across the table, the silhouette needs to be distinctive, needs to be unique, different from the others. With miniatures, it's a little bit easier because we can actually sit there and make the pose somewhat unique so that you know that the figure with one sword up and standing forth with a staff in the other hand is that character over there. And but if you give it a unique silhouette overall, whether it's a monster or a character, it's going to be easier to recognize across the board, it's going to make more impact, and it's going to be more memorable. Now, if you go back in, go look at your favorite video game. All right, let's go all the way back. Let's say Doom, the original Doom. Um, by terrain, I mean things like ruins, buildings, accessories, um, things like that, statuary. And you can see I'm starting to already build up a nice amount of paint on the back of my fingernail. But Doom, the original first-person shooter. Doom, if you look at the silhouette of an imp, which is the greenish brown humanoid demon things, it's a totally different silhouette from that of one of those pink munchers, the pink bull-like things that would charge, which is totally different from a spider demon, which is totally different from a lost soul. They all had different looks. Okay, make sure the brush is damp. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and add in a little bit more wash medium. Thin this down a little bit more. And blend this in, which will also coincidentally get this into the belly of the brush. Dab it into the highlight color, and we're going to move on to the other leg. Okay, we're going to start from up here. We're going to paint on our highlight areas and kind of blend it down. And a little bit more of the dark just to anyway. So yeah, if you ever get into sculpting, consider silhouette, the shape, the what makes it different. Okay, coming down. It's looking kind of painterly as it dries. This is giving us more of a variance in the base coat that I'm then going to be modifying when I get around to actually doing the washes. So I think this is going to be more of a sometimes technique.
Cookies are a sometimes food.
And then we're going to kind of come in here and just tab, tab, tab. Okay. Now, just a little bit more of the brown. Not the brown, the greenish brown. Let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and just wash this on. And we're going to just come in the center. And then a little bit more between the toesies and blend it in just to kind of really bring out. Okay. And then just bring some down up here. Yeah. Okay. Bring that down. Okay. Then we're going to do the head, and I'm going to call the painting side a done. It's not done. All we're doing ended up with is something that's going to basically be a base coat, because we're going to use more traditional shape techniques on it after this. Okay. I'm going to kind of bring it down. And I'm going to paint along here and just kind of blend in the lip color onto the edge here. Okay. We're going to do the same thing on this side now. We're going to kind of paint over where we want the highlights a little bit. And we're going to blend over with the wet green. Yeah, I've veered away from that technique and gone straight into wet blending. Okay. Now we're going to paint over the nose. And a little bit of the pink. And bring it on to the... I say pink, it's actually more of a khaki, but compared to the green, it's almost pink. And now, wet blending is best done if you've got a retarder, because you can mix it more evenly before it dries. But, oh well. Okay, so for right now, well, I'm going to go up on the center back now. So, bring this down across here. And a little bit more of the brown to mix in here. Kind of. Okay. Now we have a basic shade. I mean, once again, it has a very paint look to it. The brush strokes are kind of not what I wanted. Oh, come on. There. The brush strokes are a bit more extreme than I wanted. It's not as smoothly blended. But I'm going to be working with washes and glazes to try and smooth that out as time goes on. Now, time to go up top side, flip down the bracket, and bring it back to me. And turn that off. There we go. So, oh. That's a little bit more because it's still reading quite bright. I mean, look at Shinji over here glowing like a spotlight. And then begging for pittance. Yes, baby girl. You go on. Go on, Pussbutt. Yeah. So, that was a failed experiment in loaded brush blending. Obviously, I need to do a lot more practice, and when practicing techniques like that, miniatures are actually not the best option to use. Now, it did help give it more of a poopy look, poopy diaper look, but it didn't really catch the way I wanted it to. Techniques like that, learning and practicing them, don't do them on a figure. Do them on a piece of paper. Do them on a piece of poster board. Something flat so you can practice the stroke. Just because it didn't work this time doesn't mean I'm not going to use it in the future. It means I'm going to practice more on it. It means I'm going to do more with it before I use it on a miniature. Yes, I've got cheap Kroger cheese puffs. And now, because I know some people are probably going to be asking, at this point in time, the Green Tide is at 72.52. It is this close to 300% funded, with just under 2 weeks to go. As shown by my posting of the Goblin sample earlier today, the Green Tide is actually, the Goblins are almost ready. I am not certain that we will make it to the siege engines. Even if we don't, I'm going to start work on them. So, and of course, here comes a Ralph. So that if we do end up getting the siege engines, they will be mostly done by the time it hits. Yes. Crazy kitty. Are you still there, Mark? Do you mind? Do you mind? Alright, let's go. No, you're going down. No, let go of that. Let go of that. Go. Shoot. Well, it looks like it's just me now. If you're still with me, don't forget the whole like, subscribe, and bell icon. Of course, Anycubic Photon does amazing prints. And I'm going to be going ahead and calling it a night. So, I'm going to be holding up my hand, and I'm going to be counting from 5 to 1. When I get to 1, I'm going to say something goofy, and then go, and that'll be it. Oh, you came back just in time. I was sitting there going, hello, Bueller, anyone? Okay, so, like I said, practicing a technique like that is best done on a piece of paper or cardboard. And don't give up because it doesn't work. It didn't work well for me this time. But, it doesn't work well for me this time. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to try again. The only way to get a technique like that to work is to practice at it until you get the feel for it, until you understand why you do what you do. And a lot of that is just practice. Okay, so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Practice makes perfect.